I'm divorcing you, and I've already sold the beach house to start over with Kyle. She said it like she was ordering a coffee, casual and confident. There was a soft lilt in her voice, a kind of self-congratulatory amusement. I could hear the echo of wind behind her, probably standing on the porch, the one I rebuilt with my own hands, overlooking the Atlantic. I didn't say much. Just pressed the phone tighter to my ear, let the silence do the heavy lifting. Kyle and I need a fresh start, she added, as if this was a romantic reboot instead of betrayal. My eyes wandered to the Brussels skyline outside the hotel window. Steel gray clouds hung low over the spires. It was early afternoon there. I was 6,000 miles from home, halfway through a property negotiation, and this was the moment Vanessa decided to torch 15 years of marriage. I kept my voice steady. "When did you close the sale?" "Yesterday," she said, and I could almost hear her lips curl in that familiar smirk she wore when she thought she'd won something. "Buyers moving in next week. I figured you wouldn't mind staying at the Marriott when you get back. Since you're always traveling anyway." I said, "I understand." We hung up, then I sat there, one hand still holding the phone, the other clenched loosely over the desk. My mind wasn't racing, it was assembling, calculating, not emotionless, but not panicked either, because Vanessa had overlooked something. She thought she understood me, thought I was a man of routines and gentle habits. She thought I'd just sigh, maybe curse, maybe cry, maybe send my lawyer a tired email and spend a few nights in a hotel licking my wounds. But I don't operate that way. You don't spend 2 decades negotiating multi-million-dollar property deals without learning how to hedge your losses and protect your foundations. I turned from the window, pulled out my laptop, and opened my inbox. 2, Monica Harrison, title agent. 2, Brian Eldridge, attorney. Subject, urgent fraudulent property sale attempt. I typed with precision. Rain began to tap the glass behind me. Vanessa had no idea. She hadn't sold the house. She'd just lit a match to a contract she never read. My name is George Whitaker. I'm 52 years old, and for the past 23 years I've made my living as a commercial property negotiator based in Jacksonville, Florida. I don't wear flashy suits. I don't talk fast. I listen. I wait. I read everything. Twice. My work's never been about brute force or charm. It's about patience and precision. Most people skim the fine print. I live in it. The clauses buried at the bottom of page 5, the footnotes others wave off. Those are where leverage lives. That's where deals are made or quietly destroyed. I've made a career out of spotting what others miss. Clients come to me when they're in too deep, too many variables, too many traps. They think it's luck when I pull the right clause from a forgotten contract and save them $100,000. But it's not luck. It's practice. It's discipline. It's experience. And yet, I failed to apply any of that scrutiny to the one contract that should have mattered most, my marriage. With Vanessa, I was blind where I was always sharp, soft where I was trained to be steel. I let her handle our social lives, our decor, even our shared accounts for a time. I thought love was supposed to be different from business. More trust, less checking. But trust without clarity is just vulnerability. Looking back, there were signs. Discreet, but there. Late-night texts she wouldn't explain. Gym visits that stretched into half days. Business trips she stopped asking to join. A slow shift in how she smiled at me. More pity than pride. In my work, I've walked away from 7-figure deals because something didn't smell right, because one clause didn't align, because someone hesitated on a signature. And yet I let a woman I thought I knew sign everything with quick strokes, her eyes never leaving her phone. I handed her control of my home, my routines, my sense of partnership, assuming she was reading the lines I was too tired to see. That was my mistake, and it wouldn't happen again, because now I was awake. And the man who reads every contract was finally reading the one that mattered, the one she'd hoped I'd never notice until it was far too late. I met Vanessa 16 years ago at a real estate conference in Orlando. She worked for a luxury property management firm, sharp, polished, ambitious in a way that didn't apologize. She wore confidence like a tailored suit, and I found myself drawn to it. We met over hors d'oeuvres and contract jokes, and by the end of the night, we were trading numbers and business cards, though I only ever needed one of those again. We married within a year. No fanfare, no sprawling guest list. Just her sister, my brother, and a courthouse clerk who smiled like she knew something we didn't. And maybe she did. Back then, everything felt easy. Vanessa made the world brighter. She was the first person to ever talk to me like I wasn't boring. Like the quiet man with the spreadsheet brain had something rare, something worth loving. We bought the beach. House in Amelia Island 3 years after we said our vows. 4 bedrooms, wraparound deck, soft ocean air that smelled like possibility. It was everything we said we wanted. Our forever place, she'd called it that first night, with a glass of wine held high and the waves humming behind us. I'd built a life of spreadsheets and due diligence, but this felt like a dream we made real. I worked long hours, sometimes away for weeks, but always came back to that house, and to her. On weekends, I'd trade my laptop for a hammer, replacing deck boards while she sketched redesigns for the kitchen. She'd say things like, "Let's host something next month," and I'd nod, grateful she was the one who kept our social calendar alive. But time has a way of thinning the shine. Vanessa left property management after a few years, said she needed flexibility. She launched her own interior design consultancy. At first I was proud, then I was confused. Meetings I wasn't told about, expenses that didn't line up, eyes that wandered past me even when I stood right in front of her. The house still looked the same. So did she. But something was shifting beneath the surface, like the slow pull of a riptide you don't feel until you're already too far from shore. And still, I held on, because the house, the vows, the memories, they weren't just bricks and dates, they were promises. Ones I thought we'd both meant. It started with the gym. Vanessa had always dabbled in wellness trends, yoga retreats, juice cleanses, the occasional spa weekend. But 2 years ago, she joined a high-end gym downtown and suddenly became devoted. 5 days a week, sometimes twice a day. She'd talk about form, posture, progress, and Kyle, the trainer she just clicked with. At first, I didn't think much of it, encouraged it even. We were both in our 40s, and taking care of herself was something I admired. She lit up when she talked about her sessions. That mattered. But Kyle was different. You don't spend decades in negotiation without developing a sixth sense for tone shifts, eye movements, silence that comes a second too late. I noticed the receipts first, dinners at places we'd never been together, charges from boutique hotels in towns she'd never mentioned visiting. I asked once gently, and she brushed it off with a laugh. "Girls' weekend," she said. "You wouldn't have liked it anyway." Then she stopped joining me on my trips. We used to build our schedules around my travel, turning my business trips into our mini getaways. She loved Paris, adored the flea markets in Tokyo, always found something magical about jet lag and street food, but suddenly she was too busy or needed to focus on the business. I would text her from airports, send photos of places we used to explore together. Her replies grew shorter, less warmth, less her. I didn't fight her, didn't interrogate or beg for more. Instead, I started watching more closely. I reviewed our joint accounts weekly. I began quietly documenting expenses, patterns, timelines. I didn't need a confrontation. I needed clarity. I didn't yell or snoop or betray myself by reacting on instinct. Emotion clouds judgment. And if there's one thing I've learned in business, it's this: never negotiate from a place of weakness. I remembered what she said when she signed the refinancing paperwork a year ago, how she didn't bother to read it. "Just tell me where to sign, George," she'd laughed, phone in one hand, nail polish drying on the other. I remembered thinking then, she trusts me too much, but trust is a currency, and I was beginning to realize she'd been trading hers elsewhere. So I did what I always do when I smell a bad deal forming. I prepared my position and waited. 11. Months before that phone call in Brussels, I sat across from Vanessa in our home office. as she flipped through a thick folder of refinancing paperwork. She was scrolling through her phone, barely glancing at the pages. "This is just for the Tampa property, right?" she asked, tapping at the screen. "Mostly," I replied, which wasn't a lie. Most of the documents were for our investment property, but nestled between those contracts was a single transfer of ownership form. Quiet, legal, final. It moved our beach house into a living trust I'd created in my name alone. She didn't question it, just signed where I'd placed the yellow sticky flags. It wasn't malice. Not then. I hadn't caught her in a lie or found any definitive proof of betrayal. But something in the air had changed. Subtle shifts in her tone, her interest, her warmth. She'd stopped talking about our plans and started talking about her options. So I took the same advice I'd given clients for decades: hope for the best. Prepare for the betrayal. People think asset protection is just for billionaires, tycoons, with offshore accounts and boardroom enemies. But sometimes, it's for a man who feels the earth softening under his marriage, watching the tide come in faster than he expected. The living trust was airtight, structured to prevent any sale or transfer without my signature. It wasn't a revenge tool. It was a safeguard, a shield. I never told her about it, not when she redecorated the beach house as if it were solely hers, not when she began referring to it as my little coastal escape to friends, not even when she started spending more time there than she did with me. You can't make someone stay. You can't force love to behave, but you can stop someone from stealing what you've built with your own hands. That house wasn't just a property. It was my labor, my vision, my sanctuary. And if she was going to walk out, she wasn't taking it with her. Vanessa had always mocked my obsession with the fine print. But the fine print had always been my language. And on that page, signed, sealed, and witnessed, was the sentence that would undo every scheme she hadn't even begun yet. I never needed revenge. I just needed readiness. I didn't tell Vanessa I was coming home. Instead, I landed in Jacksonville just after sunrise, picked up a rental car, and drove the familiar stretch to Amelia Island with the kind of silence that settles deep into your bones. The ocean was to my left, steady and indifferent the way it had always been. The kind of silence that told me I wasn't coming back to plead. I was coming back to reclaim. Her silver Mercedes was parked where I used to park, angled too far to the right, crowding the edge of the driveway like it didn't know its place. I could hear voices through the open windows when I stepped onto the porch. Laughter. A man's voice talking about knocking down a wall. The kitchen wall. I pushed the door open without knocking. Vanessa stood at the counter, barefoot, a champagne flute in hand. Her sundress was floral, breezy, like she was already in the middle of some lifestyle rebrand. Kyle was beside her, gesturing at an iPad screen. The laughter stopped as soon as I entered. "George," she said, blinking, "you're home early." I can see I wasn't expected. Kyle stepped back, clearing his throat. "I should probably—" "No," I cut him off. "You should stay. This involves you too." Vanessa looked at me like I was being unreasonable, like I was interrupting a casual brunch and not the attempted dismantling of my life. "Let's not make this dramatic, George. We've both moved on." I opened my briefcase and placed the deed to the living trust on the counter like a declaration of war, silent, weighty, final. "You didn't have the right to sell this house," I said, my voice calm. "You signed it into a trust last year, remember? The paperwork you didn't bother to read while texting through the refinancing meeting." Kyle leaned in, frowning. "You said it was your property. You said—" "She didn't read the contract," I said, not breaking eye contact with Vanessa. "But I did, I always do." She grabbed the documents with shaking fingers, scanning them like they might rearrange themselves into something salvageable. Kyle stepped back again. "I'll give you a minute." "No need," I said, already walking toward the front. "She can explain it to you, if she can understand it herself." I left them in the kitchen we'd once designed together, surrounded by broken plans and the sound of truth finally arriving. Sunday morning, I sat across from Brian in his quiet office downtown. No receptionists, no phones ringing, just silence, and the sound of papers sliding across a lacquered desk. "There's more," he said, flipping open a manila folder. I leaned in, expecting something petty, a missed payment maybe. But what Brian unfolded was something else entirely. "She's been siphoning funds," he began, quietly, methodically, small transfers at first, then bolder. "About $170,000 has been moved into a private account over the past 9 months. My stomach tightened. That was nearly all our joint liquidity. Our emergency fund, vacation budgets, savings for retirement upgrades. She's also signed a commercial lease," he continued, sliding a photocopy forward. "Savannah, retail space, new boutique fitness, studio. Vanessa Sanders and Kyle Bennett, co-owners." I blinked at the paper, reading their names typed together like some startup romance fantasy. It wasn't just betrayal. It was premeditated, operational. I stared at the lease form, the notary stamp, the dates. This had been in motion for months, long before her little performance over the phone. They weren't planning to walk away. "Clean," I said quietly. "They were planning to fund their next life with mine." Brian gave a grim nod. "It gets worse." Of course it did. The buyer of the beach house, the one Vanessa thought was in final escrow. It's a shell company, owned by a Jason Bennett. I looked up. Kyle's brother? Registered 2 weeks ago. They were trying to get it below market, probably planning to flip it quickly once the title cleared. The weight of it all settled in my chest like wet sand. Not just infidelity, not just a failed marriage, but a con, a coordinated theft. I didn't raise my voice, didn't swear or break anything. I just breathed. "How do we stop it?" "You already did," Brian said. "The trust holds. The sales. Frozen. But now we decide how far you want to go. Civil court, fraud allegations, frozen assets, criminal referrals." I looked down at the paper again. Their names side by side, smiling in ink. "I want every dollar back," I said evenly. "I want them to understand the cost of trying to gut someone who sees through contracts for a living." And for the first time in days, I actually smiled. Not because I was happy, but because the game had finally begun. By Monday morning, I was no longer a husband in mourning. I was a man with a plan. While Jacksonville was still stretching awake, I met Brian in his office again. The espresso machine hissed behind his assistant's desk. Legal pads were stacked like ammunition. Brian already had the divorce papers drafted, and with them, an emergency injunction to block any property transfers. "The moment we file," he said, sliding the folder toward me. "She can't touch the beach house again." I nodded and signed, my pen moving with slow deliberation. I didn't feel rage, only resolve. Next, I walked into First Coast Bank and spoke with Thomas Parker, a branch manager I'd negotiated commercial deals with years ago. He recognized me, shook my hand, and when I told him what was going on, didn't blink. We sat in his glass-walled office overlooking a parking lot blurred by rain. I moved every cent from our joint accounts into a new trust, froze the credit cards, canceled her gym auto draft. By lunchtime, Vanessa's financial oxygen supply had thinned to fumes. I didn't tell her. Not yet. War fought loud was too easy to prepare for. I wanted silence, like the hush before a hurricane. After the bank, I drove to the beach house. The rain had grown heavier, hammering the windshield, graying out the sky. I sat in the car for a moment, watching the surf crash against the dunes, like it had every winter since we bought the place. The deck still bore the markings from last summer's restain job, my brushstrokes, not Kyle's. The siding still bore the screws I had driven in by hand. Inside, I walked from room to room, with slow reverence. The silence was cathedral deep. Her perfume no longer lingered. Her presence was absent in a way that felt final. Back at the kitchen table, I opened my laptop and drafted the final version of the settlement proposal. It wasn't vengeful, just fair, and non-negotiable. As I sent the document to Brian, I looked out the window again. The ocean rolled on, indifferent and unchanging. Vanessa wanted to play house flipper with someone else's dreams, but I wasn't a man you could swindle with a smile and a signature. The storm had started, And I was exactly where I belonged, at the calm, unshakable center of it. Vanessa's lawyer responded first. The email came just past midnight, like they'd hoped to catch me off guard, long-winded and dripping with confidence. He called the trust manipulative, the refinancing misleading, and promised to prove intent to defraud a spouse. I read it once, then closed my laptop without replying. The next morning, Brian and I finalized our settlement offer. It wasn't generous, but it was more than fair. She'd return 60% of the misappropriated funds. She'd sign away all rights to the beach house and its equity. I'd waive any claim to her business and choose not to press criminal charges. A clean break. No courtroom drama. No orange jumpsuits. No headlines. Brian sent it over with a timestamp and a polite deadline, 48 hours. Vanessa had 2 days to walk away. After that, I'd proceed, calmly, thoroughly, and without a backward glance. She texted me that afternoon. Just one line. "You're bluffing." I didn't answer. What was there to bluff about? The papers were real. The documents were filed. The property was mine. That evening I sat on the deck of the beach house, the same chair I'd sat in during storms, the same spot where we once toasted to forever. I listened to the sea and let the wind carry her voice out of my memory. I didn't feel angry, not anymore, just done. Her betrayal had carved something, open inside me, but in its place I'd found a kind of steel I didn't know I had. I wasn't the man she could charm out of a contract anymore. I was the man who wrote them. Brian texted an hour later. Her lawyer had called, voice tight with disbelief. They were reviewing the documents, trying to find a crack, but there weren't any, just signatures, dates, deadlines, and decisions already made. Vanessa was used to storming out, leaving someone else to hold the door open. But this time, when she turned to look back, I wasn't there. She'd find no weakness, no guilt, no appeal. Just the echo of a closed door and the silence that follows someone who's walked away. For good. The conference room was colder than usual, the kind of sterile, chill-only legal offices managed to perfect. Vanessa sat across from me, dressed sharply, hair pinned like she'd come to win something. But the fire in her eyes wasn't defiance. It was desperation hiding behind routine. Her lawyer, young, expensive-looking and already sweating, fiddled with his pen, eyes darting toward the thick folder Brian laid on the table. No small talk, no greetings, just silence. Brian began, his voice steady and surgical. These documents establish the property transfer to the George Whitaker Living Trust, signed by the defendant. He slid the first page forward. Here are the withdrawal records from the joint account, unauthorized by Mr. Whitaker. Another paper. And this is the affidavit from Jason Bennett, confirming intent to purchase a fraudulently transferred asset through a shell company. Her lawyer skimmed each one like he was looking for a trap door. There wasn't one. Vanessa hadn't looked at me once. When Brian finished, her lawyer leaned toward her. He whispered. She nodded once without blinking, and then picked up the "Danu." Her signature flowed across the page, confident, practiced, but there was a tremble in her other hand. No apology. No tears. Just ink on paper. Maybe she thought silence was dignified. Maybe she was still playing a role, controlled, untouchable. Or maybe she finally realized the game had ended the moment she tried to sell something that was never hers. I didn't speak. Not to her, not to him. Brian collected the signed documents, checked every page with the same care I once gave every contract of my career. He nodded once at me. Done. Vanessa stood to leave. Her heels clicked against the polished tile, then faded down the hall without so much as a backward glance, and I didn't follow. There was nothing left to say. She'd tried to cash in a marriage like it was an expired investment. She'd gambled on my silence. She lost. Outside, the late afternoon sun cut sharp lines across the pavement. I stepped into it feeling no lighter, no happier, but cleaner. Like a ledger had finally been balanced. No revenge speech, no final cruelty, just signatures, and goodbye. 6 months later, I stood barefoot on the new deck of the beach house, coffee in hand, watching the Atlantic tide roll in. The salt air felt cleaner now, no longer tangled in old conversations or the echoes of footsteps that weren't coming back. The siding had been replaced, not just patched, replaced. I chose something more resilient this time, something that could handle wind and time without needing constant care. The old kitchen, the one we renovated together years ago, was gone too. In its place, a simpler design. Sleek, modern, mine. This house used to be a shared dream. Now it was a statement, not of wealth or ownership, but of quiet reclamation. I'd heard through mutual friends that the fitness boutique in Savannah wasn't doing well, that Kyle had backed out of daily operations and Vanessa was struggling to keep it afloat. The irony was apparent, but I felt no joy in it, only a dull ache where hope used to live. She wasn't a villain in the grand cinematic sense, just someone who mistook love for leverage, and leverage for love. Maybe if I'd spoken up sooner, fought harder to keep our foundation intact. But no, even that thought had lost its sting. This wasn't about blame anymore. It was about balance. I'd spent my life in negotiation rooms, trading square footage and contracts, always seeking the best deal. But peace isn't something you bargain for. You build it, one quiet decision at a time. The house hadn't changed the tide. The ocean still came and went like always. But inside these walls, something fundamental had shifted. I no longer measured my worth against what someone else failed to see. I finished my coffee and turned toward the house. The floors creaked differently now, less like ghosts walking with me, more like a space settling into itself. My phone buzzed from the countertop. Monica, my title agent, asking if I wanted to tour another property next week. Maybe I would, maybe I wouldn't. But either way, I'd walk into the next chapter with my eyes wide open, not looking back for approval or apology. The house was still fine. So was the silence. So was the peace. I stood at the window as dusk settled across the shoreline, the horizon drawn in soft strokes of gold and ash. The ocean murmured its endless refrain, indifferent to court filings, broken vows, or bruised pride. And maybe that was the lesson all along. This wasn't about revenge. Vanessa had expected anger. She'd braced herself for it, yelling, threats, retaliation. But what came instead was steadiness, quiet paperwork, unshakable facts. The deed was always in the drawer. I'd learned early in my career that power wasn't in what you shouted. It was in what you prepared. That the most effective lever wasn't force. It was foresight. Looking back, I can trace the thread through every moment. Her voice over the phone in Brussels, dripping with arrogance. Kyle in my kitchen, talking about tearing down walls, the year. Champagne, the laugh, the way she'd said, "You won't mind staying at the Marriott." But it wasn't the fraud or betrayal that defined the ending. It was the restraint. I didn't burn her world down. I didn't want to. I simply built my own walls higher, stronger, honest. Justice isn't always a gavel or a jail sentence. Sometimes it's a man walking back into his own home, turning the key without asking permission. Sometimes it's the look in a liar's eyes when they realize they've been seen clearly, fully, and not chased, just dismissed. I rebuilt the beach house not because I needed to erase her, but because I needed to make the place mine again. I didn't remove every photo or memory. I kept one. Us on the deck 10 years ago, laughing into the wind. Not to remember her fondly, but to remind myself that love can be real, even if it doesn't last. Vanessa will move on. Kyle too. Maybe they'll make it. Maybe not. That part's not my story to follow. What I do know is this. I never compromised who I was. Not for a marriage, not for the money, not even when it would have felt good to. Peace is a quiet room with your name still on the title. It's knowing you acted with grace when no one expected it. And sometimes that's the loudest justice of all.